This is Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative. This season, we're partnering with Democracy Exchange, Canada's Democracy Summit, taking place April 16th to 18th in downtown Toronto. The summit tackles today's most urgent civic issues over 3 days of programming, including inspiring speakers, thought-provoking expert panels, and hands-on workshops. As a Progress Canada listener, you can save 20% off registration by using this code, Lightbulb at DXC26. Visit democracyexchange.org to register today. Today we're joined by Halifax MP Shannon Miedema. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Okay, so I want to go back to the beginning, which for you at the federal level, at least, is back to a year ago. And it's wild how much has happened since then, of course. But I want to take it back to your nomination race because, of course, you weren't gearing up for a general election per se at that time. You were running for the nomination in Halifax because the former member had become mayor and the position had been vacated. So there was a contested nomination for a by-election. You went up against a number of other candidates. There was the specter of a general election coming up, of course, because it was due that fall. But there was also, a lot of upheaval with the recent U.S. election. The party, quite frankly, was not doing well in the polls. What the heck made you launch into a political career at that time?
Yeah, and honestly, I had never really considered politics as a next wave of my career until really the October, when I was in Ottawa receiving an award for the climate work that I had been part of at the Halifax Regional Municipality. I was with the former mayor, Mike Savage, now Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia, to receive the award. And it was a big climate session with the insurance industry. And I had dinner with a friend and we were talking about our careers and where we were going. She was working for a minister at the time and was like, well, I'm probably going to lose my job any day. I'm going to have to figure it out. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, I've been at my job for 15 years and same old brick walls. And, I love working for Halifax. I love driving change, but I just want to scale my impact. And we were just talking and she's like, hey, have you ever thought about running for Andy's position? And I was like, no, I've never honestly thought about that. Are you crazy? And we talked about it at length for a couple of hours. And the next day I was like, oh no, that's terrifying. Nope, never mind. But then I just really couldn't stop thinking about it because everything I had been thinking about, what could I do next? I wasn't super, I didn't get that excitement of oh, this is the right thing to pursue. And with this one, I couldn't let it go. I tried to push it away and then it would just kind of come back. I'd get all excited again. And so socialized it with my 3 children and my husband, and, was very much well, I'll just take the first step. I'll just raise my hand halfway up and be like, can I have some information? Can I have a conversation? What does this application, this green lighting application process look like? What does this whole thing look like? And of course, there wasn't real clarity on how it would all go at the time, but there was general thinking that, it would probably roll into the general election. If not, it would just be 2 separate ones, but they'd be fairly close together. And I was like, well, I could just take leave of absence from work, try this little adventure, and then go back to my job when I lose, and it's fine. I'm not going to win the nomination. It's fine. It'll just be a good little, foray into what it is to try politics. I'll meet new people. I thought, why not? Never really thinking or being super confident that I would be where I am today. So that's kind of how that went.
It's hilarious to me because it sounds like a lot of women's experience entering politics. And quite frankly, it's always this, it's not always on gender lines, but I think it often happens that women go, oh, I want to go solve this problem. And they usually get into politics where they, like you said, hit a brick wall and are like, this isn't getting solved. I guess I have to run, versus men who tend to be, I am the solution. I must go.
No comment. Yeah, well, no. And I really believe in the public service. I really enjoyed being a bureaucrat at the city. I really enjoyed the local level of government. I really enjoyed the leadership role that I had, and just working with all the politicians across all three levels of government, kind of walking that fine line on how do you affect change. And really, like, at the end of the day, it always came down to power, politics, and money. And I was like, okay, well, here I am, this like slightly bigger fish in a quite small pond. If I can change any of that, and maybe have a little more say to really do good for my community that I've been working for my whole career, that I love. If I can like amplify my voice in some way and really represent them, like, it just seemed like this cool other side of a coin, and yeah, so that's what kept me kind of going through step by step the process.
I know you have a lot of municipal background, but had you been involved on the partisan side of politics before, or was it more on the sort of governing side?
No, yeah, I never was like a card-carrying member of any party at any level. Very politically engaged and always voted, taught my children the importance of voting, all that kind of thing. But no, it was like a whole new community that I kind of just like dove into. And honestly, I don't think I would have even survived the nomination if it hadn't been for some really dedicated, longtime Liberals in the riding, especially some of the women that kind of interviewed me and were like, okay, yep, you're the one. This is the right choice. I'm going to support you. I'm going to tell everyone I know, you call these people, I'm calling. And then we did this whole just big snowball of an effort. And, they showed me the ropes and really took me under their wing. And that was the best part of the whole campaign, was really learning about this huge volunteerism in community that I wasn't fully aware of before, because I had never done the partisan thing. So people just cared a lot. A lot of people just showed up that had never done it before, to door knock, to help in the office. They're like, this is such an important election for Canada. We just want to do something. People took leaves of absence to support the campaign. Like, it was just such a rewarding, supportive feeling, honestly.
It's something I think about a lot just from my own political experience, because there's this sense in politics that, you have to be from some political dynasty to get involved. Like, you have to inherit the right to participate in our politics at some kind of high level, or you have to know certain people in the political process already. Can you talk about, I'm going to get off this nomination part of our conversation soon, but can you talk about how that even happened? Like, you had your friend who had suggested, hey, you should run. How did you get involved with these folks within the party in the first place? Because again, if those relationships if they're not pre-existing, I think a lot of people think like, how the heck do I even get started?
Yeah, well, I had, I still have a strong relationship with Mike Savage, having worked with him as mayor for 12 of the 15 years I was at the city. And he really, he's great at lifting people up that he is supportive of, that he thinks are doing good work. And so he did that for me on a personal level, as well as for the climate change file at the city. Like, when I first started as manager at the city, it was me and one other person who did kind of lake health. And by the time I left, we were a team of 30, and I was the director of like a department of environment and climate change that didn't exist in the same way before. And that never would have happened without political will and actually giving investment in the work and in staffing people on a permanent basis. And that really was championed by Mike Savage and the council. 17 votes. We had a quite green council at the time, still do, I would say, in the city. And because at the end of the day, I could only go so far unless I had that political will and buy-in. So I have really strong relationships with a lot of past and current council members. And I used to work with Darren Fisher when he was a councillor, who is the member of parliament for Dartmouth across the harbor here. I have a great relationship with him. I even worked with Andy Fillmore when he was a senior planner at the city, when I was kind of a young unionized staffer when I first started at the city. And so just had some connections, just through the work I was doing. And I was fortunate enough to get to go to a couple of the COPs, the big climate conferences, with Mike Savage, both in Egypt and in Dubai. And so in those kind of processes leading up to them and at them and after, got to meet and discuss with ministers of environment federally and other ministers and other kind of political and bureaucratic staff at the federal level, and worked really closely with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities as well, which is a strong voice for cities at the federal level. So just being in your career for as long as you are, being in a small city, you have those relationships. So I say yes, it definitely was a part of how I kind of even was brave enough to dip my toe in those like early conversations.
So you mentioned a number of different municipal relationships there that were really important from the start. I'm wondering how much your municipal experience has helped you in this first year of being an MP, because like you said, you weren't as involved in the partisan side of politics before, but you did have a pretty good internal understanding of politics. How important has that municipal experience has been to help you sort of hit the ground running?
Yeah, I think I've really drawn on what I've learned over time, growing into bigger and bigger leadership roles, navigating complex relationships. We wouldn't have gotten our climate plan through 3 months into COVID and then funded in kind of like a sustainable way without really working with everybody based on kind of what they're prioritizing, where they are. So whether it be different levels of government, the utilities, the NGOs, the general public, the business sector, insurance sector, I kind of found my groove in how I would try and move an agenda forward in a way that kind of worked for everyone. And it was a great experience to see how when you have some positive momentum and you work towards like what's going to work for everybody, you can really speed things along. And of course there were setbacks and bumps the way there always are with like trying to drive really hard change, but people were gravitating to that and really wanting to be part of kind of this like more positive reaction to what we're facing, like the realities of climate change in Halifax and everywhere, right? But it's really been driven home here in recent years with all the extreme weather events we've been facing. So there was a growing awareness. There was just kind of a magic kind of timing. But I would say, relationship building, figuring out how to have impact, where to pick your battles, communication skills, like all those things that were really important in my old job, I would say are still really important in this job.
So I want to talk about going onto the Hill, because the Hill is a different environment entirely, of course. It is very specific. Even like in my provincial experience as well, it's a very, very different environment. And I had your colleague Chi Win on in the fall as well, and she was talking about, actually I ran into her on her second day on the Hill just outside the fence, and we were talking about like what an experience that is. What has surprised you most about the political decision-making process within the walls and halls of Parliament versus, your municipal experience?
Yeah, it's entirely different, I would say. And I think I knew it would be different, but it felt different going there and being like, oh, I'm one of 100 and whatever votes. And we kind of vote together in large part. And going from being the leader of a group who really called all the shots, like I was always very consultative and, but really I could just kind of, this is what, no, we're not doing that. We're going to do this, whatever, to being in, new member of Parliament, backbencher, not in cabinet. Like I feel like cabinet would feel a lot more similar to kind of where I was in my past job. But, and there's no cabinet equivalent at the city. Every councillor votes the way they'd like to vote, and they all work together and talk about how they're going to vote. But at the end of the day, it's 17 independent votes, and the way things get done, it's such a giant machine at the federal level with all of the political staff and then all of the bureaucrats supporting the departments and the ministries, right? So it's just an overwhelming scale, I would say, and just number of things that happen on a day-to-day basis at the federal level.
So you've mentioned, there's obviously cabinet as a body. There's the full caucus of the Liberal Party that you sit in as well, but there's also break-off caucuses as well. And one of the oldest ones, since they've really started making these like thematic caucuses, I guess, is the Women's Caucus. So we're going to be airing this episode on International Women's Day, and I've always been obviously very interested in getting more women in politics. I'm sure you are as well. The Women's Caucus has always been a way to help do that, but also to help newly elected members sort of navigate this building that largely is made for the patriarchy more than so women, right? If we're going to be frank. So, like based on your own journey so far, and I know you're a year into it federally, how can we actually make it easier and an important point, safer for women to participate in the political process, both as an MP like yourself or behind the scenes as a staffer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a great question, and it's a great topic of conversation that I have in many ways all the time. I would say, one of the things that got me the most frustrated when I was vying for the nomination or had won the nomination, one of the interview questions was like, well, aren't you scared? Like, did you see what happened to Catherine McKenna? Do you see what happens in the States yes, it makes me furious, but all the more reason for women who this is a choice that they want to entertain should be supported to do it, because it's a very long and painful societal shift and cultural shift that needs to happen, and we are definitely not there yet. I've definitely experienced kind of the old boys club feelings, just being on the Hill in all kinds of ways, and I think we all have, and that's just part of the transition. The great news is that we have the most women in our caucus ever. We have the most female members of parliament in Nova Scotia that we've ever had, which is 4 of 11. And the Women's Caucus is very strong. I'm not technically a member of the Women's Caucus. I'm a member of some other ones, and there are a lot. But I hugely respect it and talk to the chair all the time and attend at times. And I think it's really important that they have a voice at National Caucus on a regular basis. And they have their kind of strategic priorities that they vote on and set for the year. They're all super important. I think there's a lot of good programs happening kind of at all levels to support women in politics. There's funds, there's programs, there's kind of educational opportunities, all that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, like as a woman, if I didn't have a supportive network, a supportive family, the ability to kind of take this chance, and what I think would be like the fortitude to kind of withstand it, I wouldn't have done it for sure. So you really do need kind of a community behind you.
Do you think at all that there's a bit of a different perspective from female legislators than perhaps some of their male counterparts? I'm just thinking of like the policy topics that are sort of coming to the fore right now in our national discourse. And it's very much focused on defense. It's very much focused on the economy. It's not that these are things that women don't care about. And I also don't think women's issues is a thing. Like all issues are women's issues. All issues are men's issues. Like they really are. But at the end of the day, a lot of what we focus on when there are more women present at the decision-making table are things like getting a national child care plan going, getting dental care, like usually something with the word care in it usually comes from women legislators. Have you noticed a bit of a divide there, or is this just sort of the national moment we're in where everybody's sort of focused on these bigger, huge questions about sovereignty and things like that?
Well, I mean, I'd say with budget 2025, it was a real mix of, okay, we really need to invest in some big ways to not just kind of fall off this economic cliff. Super important. There's a conversation about making sure women have a role in the opportunities that kind of stem from all that, and that's being amplified by the Women's Caucus, but also to keep the really important social supports that as a Liberal government we've had in place for a long time, that we've grown, that we're expanding, because people really do need help right now, because all the kind of big things we're doing are going to take time to really start to show a decrease in cost of living, a decrease in cost of housing, more job opportunities. Like there's no silver bullet to any of this, right? So I think actually there's been a bit of a balance in those conversations in a lot of the rooms that I'm in. I would say the caucus, the committee meetings are all really different. I'm in Environment Committee, and I'm the only female member of Parliament. There's a Conservative female, and the rest are men. And there's a dynamic there around parties and the things we're studying and whatever. I went to Status of Women to fill in, and it was all women around the table. It was super collegial, and it was focused, like a lot of the big legislation we're doing right now is around crime and justice, and there's a lot for protection of women and girls and vulnerable in there. So
Right.
women are very strong in those conversations at committee level, in the House, etc.
So I want to pivot a little bit now and talk a bit about some of those high level issues that are going on in the country. So obviously, a lot of our economic conversation is around trade right now, is around how we're going to move forward as a country on that front. So the federal government recently launched the Atlantic Economic Panel, and that's to look at how to grow the economy in Atlantic Canada. Obviously, every province, every community, every region of the province is different and has different needs and has different resources and all these kinds of things. And I am really happy to see like an Atlantic focused panel, because there are different conversations happening there. How are you and your fellow Atlantic MPs working to make sure that Eastern Canada is getting, its share of the new jobs and investments that are coming out of this sort of Build Canada moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Atlantic Caucus is a regular regional update and voice at National Caucus. And our Prime Minister has been at almost every National Caucus meeting, which happen every week. The House is sitting for a couple of hours. So that's a really great way for him and Cabinet and all of the Liberal caucus to hear the different regional updates and priorities, concerns, whatever it is. So it's nice to have kind of a strong and united voice as Atlantic Caucus around whatever our strategic kind of priorities are. And we've been talking a lot about clean energy as an Atlantic Caucus, around economic development, trade, impacts of tariffs, small craft harbors, things like that. So kind of regionally, you have certain things that jive with all 4 provinces. And then I'm the co-chair of the Nova Scotia caucus. And so we can focus, on our province more specifically, with all 11 members being Liberal members of Parliament for Nova Scotia now. That's a strong voice for the province, I would say. Great that we have 2 ministers also from Nova Scotia, with Lena and with Sean. And then, I think Halifax, specifically my riding of like the peninsula, is really well positioned at this time we're in Canada, and with what the government is doing to benefit hugely. I don't see a future where the Port of Halifax isn't a major player in diversifying and expanding trade to Europe and other places, right? We're one of the major defense hubs in the country, with so much on the go. I think we're really well positioned to scale that, in servicing for submarines. There's now talk about a defense bank that could potentially be set up in Halifax. We've got Diana, we've got all kinds of things that are really like incubating innovation, investment, job growth, specifically in the riding. So I think that's really exciting.
Can you talk a little bit, a lot of our audience is from out west, from where you are, and I think they may not understand the strategic importance of Halifax and Nova Scotia and just the Atlantic provinces in general. When you go down to the Halifax pier, you see how much is going on there. I actually ran into a friend from high school on that pier once. So all politics is local, all that kind of stuff. But it's a really bustling place. You got ferries going all over the place. There's shipping coming in all the time. And this has always been its purpose in our country as well. If you think back to the era of the Halifax explosion, the reason why all those ships were there was because it was a major military hub, as you were talking about. It's a major shipping hub, as you talk about. I was following the mayor of Boston's recent tour because she spent a ton of time there, because of course Boston and Halifax are not that far away. The cruise ships go through both of them. And you start to think about how the rest of the world sees Halifax and its importance into, whether it's North American free trade, whether it's defense, whatever it is. Can you give a bit of background on how important this region of the province is, and this location specifically?
Yeah, historically, I think it's good for everybody to learn their Canadian history and how old the city is. And it's been a working port. Salt is in everyone's bones here. There's such a rich history of also immigration and all kinds of great things, with bumps along the way. I think Halifax has really grown and is growing into that like mid-size, really vibrant city in Canada. And yeah, I think it's funny that a lot of people haven't really set foot on the east coast of Canada. They maybe don't go further east than somewhere in Quebec or something like that, and often want to and just haven't yet. And I would say it's such a great experience to see the different corners of our country, to kind of understand all of what makes it tick. I still need to get further north than I've gone, and other places to discover, but it really gives you a sense of like the vastness of our country and makes you understand why people want to come here so much, right? Like we've got people where their dream is to come to Canada, and we're largely made up of people coming and moving to our country. And I think Halifax is, from 20 years ago, looks entirely different today than it did then. It's really matured. It's really, more welcoming, much more diverse. I think we have the highest number of QSLGBTQAI plus members in as a city in all of Canada, maybe, like, just because supportive environment, and it helps with our art scene, our culture. Yeah, and I think in terms of defense, like if you come here and you try and walk up the hill, like you're at the Citadel, right? You're at this massive
but also,
fort.
can we talk about that hill? Because
No, we can't.
I've only been there in the summer in the rain and stuff like that, but I cannot imagine climbing that hill in the winter. Like, I'm not even sure there's a railing, and that's absurd to me.
There's no railing. No. People wear those little like ice grips on their shoes that are.
I totally understand that, because certain death into the water otherwise.
We do have rickshaws, so I remember as a student, you'd go down and have a couple of drinks by the waterfront, and then people would think it would be funny to hire a rickshaw, and he would literally pull you up the hill, up past the Citadel to wherever you were going. So tourists like to take advantage of the rickshaws.
I was going to say, I guess depending on how much you drink too, perhaps the wise and sober choice despite not being sober.
Exactly.
I want to talk a little bit about the Trump of it all, because obviously Halifax specifically, and Nova Scotia in general, has a lot going for it economically, but these are pretty uncertain times. And obviously what's happening in the South and just, trade threats and things like that are really shaking things up. What are the risks to Halifax right now and, the local economy?
I wouldn't say that they're different in Halifax than really kind of across the country. And in some ways, maybe slightly could be less acute than in other places. Like it's gonna ripple as it does, depending on kind of what industries and sectors are in each place. So, the tariffs are hitting in different ways across the country. I would say, for us as a federal government, like, we're really trying to focus on affordability, on housing availability, housing affordability, mental wellness, all these things that are really important in the fate. Like, it's really hard. Like, the more the harder it is, right? And I think, if you even think about the Davos speech that Prime Minister Carney gave, and how that was received by Canadians and the world, really, I think it is, we're trying to work with hope and optimism, but like really strategically and carefully on like, how can we really turn things around and become a strong country, a strong economy where we're really taking care of everybody. And for me, that message resonates. It's exactly what I want for Halifax and our community. And so I think, it's tricky. People aren't going to make big investments at an uncertain time. There's all, we've got productivity issues. Nova Scotia has quite a low productivity level compared to other provinces and states in North America. So there's work that was already ongoing well before Trump's tariffs, et cetera. So, there's a lot of great minds working on this from across sectors and levels of government, and I think we're going to get there. It's just really trying to be sure that we're supporting people through the kind of crunchy time that we're in right now, hoping that we're going to get into some improvement. And we have seen already a little bit of improvement on, inflation rates and things like that.
You, like me, are a young person. We'll call ourselves young person for the purpose
Why
of
not?
this call. Young
You
compared
said
to
it, not
some.
me.
So, one of the struggles facing young people right now, and partly, if I ask my mom, she'll say this has always been true, but I think it is particularly acute right now, is in the housing sector. There's not a lot of housing affordability out there, pretty much at any point across the country. You know, I was sitting here in Ontario during the pandemic, and I was like, oh, love to live on the East Coast. And you're just watching these prices rise. Obviously, they're not good in Ontario. You're watching these prices rise everywhere around the country. And we all seem to be kind of in the same boat, where if you haven't already bought into the market as an owner, like, you're just not getting into the market anymore. And for those folks who are like me and they still rent, those prices are still going up. So regardless of what part of the housing ladder you're on, things are not very affordable right now. What's the federal government doing, and what can the federal government do to help make housing more affordable in Halifax for those who are trying to rent or, you know, buy their first home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, the government has a very big plan, and it's called
Yes.
Build Canada Homes. And we're all, you know, waiting to see how it all plays out. And it's a great plan. And it's really, you know, they had to create a whole, they're working on making it a crown corporation to be able to acquire land and be nimble. I actually know the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure from my past life, because he was a former mayor, and I was hanging out with mayors and staff of cities across Canada. And he's wonderful. And he really is focused on trying to have this big approach with lots of billions of dollars that is really actually going to make things move faster, be able to scale, and to be much more flexible and adaptive. And we're seeing it already with how they're rolling some, you know, funding applications and programs into one bigger program where you don't have as rigid kind of requirements we all know, well, a lot of us know what it's like to apply for federal funding. It can be really challenging, especially if you're a small nonprofit and have like a half-time staff, you know, like it can be a lot of work. And so they know that you know, the federal government's done a lot of consultation around its funding and the way it supports across all sectors. And it's really, it's nice to see that. I think they're really trying to innovate a bit. And, you know, it's always, so they're building this big machine that's hopefully going to really scale up affordable, deeply affordable, modular housing, non-market housing across this country, and fill a massive gap that we've had for literally decades. And I think it's hard to be patient, because we're saying we're going to move really fast, but you can't move, you know, it's the federal government. You can't move that fast. You can move faster than you've ever gone before, but it's still going to take a little time to see the units be brought on and be available. But we've had great announcements of projects across this country, including across the harbor in the Shannon Park area. You know, it's moving really, like, from the announcement of Build Canada Homes to where we are today, based on what I know of federal speed, like, I would say that's lightning speed. So it's hard to kind of be like, okay, but, you know, I want to get in now. And I feel for so many Canadians that are having that struggle, especially if rent is getting to, you know, a painful point, and groceries are at a painful point, which is why we just introduced the kind of GST rebate on groceries and other amenities to just another way to really try and help those that are really in that kind of crunchy zone that need a bit more help right now, in the hopes that things will be improving by the time, you know, in the next couple of years, right? So hopefully we'll be, and the goal is really to have shovels in the ground in the spring across this country. So everything I've heard at caucus about the plan is strong. There's a big portal for information, you know, all that kind of thing. And then the other piece is there's a Build Community Strong Fund, which I'm really excited about, which allows smaller local infrastructures to happen, which is really good for remote and rural communities, smaller communities where you might just really need some investment to keep your rink open, for example, right? Like, we really want to be showing that we're doing things that help on the ground in community, as well as all these really big national and international endeavors.
I find the housing space really interesting. So I'm a former director of communications at the Ministry of Housing in Ontario. So I have some background in this space. And, you know, when I was there, this is almost coming up on 10 years ago now, and we recognized the crisis coming, and we tried to do some things to fix that. And then obviously we lost government, so those things ended, but, you know, as happens. But when we were doing those things, the big concern for me as a communications person is there is that gap that you're talking about, that you get the shovels in the ground, but then it takes X number of years to actually build that housing. So the questions I always see from the public are, how long is this going to take? What's it actually going to look like? Because of course they want it to be housing that they can live in. The challenge we always had in Ontario was we spent 40, 50 years building condos for ownership that didn't have enough bedrooms for families, right? So that we didn't match the supply to the need and what people actually wanted. And then the other part is, where is the housing going? Because when I think of Nova Scotia, there's technically a lot of land if you think about it from like a large scale kind of way, but like comparative to the rest of Canada, there's not quite as much. And like my godparents live in Antigonish, and when I think about a community like that versus a community like Halifax, do you have a sense of where most of the housing is going to go? Because I think we have a sense of how long it will take. It will not be overnight, and that'll be a messaging challenge for you. But do you know where most of this housing is going in Nova Scotia?
Yeah, I would say for Halifax, or the Halifax Regional Municipality specifically, which has half of the population of Nova Scotia, and is bigger than PEI in size.
You got to get that in there, that Atlantic.
Why not? There's a lot of places where they're already are moving forward with big new communities, and they're largely on greenfield sites, so natural spaces that haven't been developed before. The city is still working towards densifying its core, but that's usually slower, a little more expensive. So in terms of new communities, they're often in green space, and we've got nodes that kind of commute into the core that are, there's a whole big regional plan that has like, okay, these are the areas we're going to densify. So kind of for HRM specifically, there's been a long-term plan. It's pretty well known kind of what's going to probably happen. Whether it all should or not is another question. And then in terms of the federal government, they're looking at, okay, what are the lands that we own and control right now? Like Canada lands first, because those lands were for redevelopment in the first place and have lots of opportunity, which is like the Shannon Park lands here. But then also, what other departments federally own land that could make sense for housing? Because that's the thing, you can't just plop it anywhere. You really need to have a good vision and strategy when it comes to transportation, transit, complete communities. People want to live and work and play close by. We don't want big trafficy highways all over the place. And all of that takes a super long time to do right also. So hopefully these places are coming in where there's already been a lot of that work done, and the areas have largely been identified so that they can fit into the kind of master plan for the city or the region or whatever.
Sort of brings to mind the importance of the environment in these conversations, because one of the questions we've had in Ontario is, hey, you can't go build on our prime farmland, and you can't go build on our wetlands. Like, there are things here that need to continue existing in order to supply and sustain the communities that we build next to them, of course. You obviously have a long background in the environment and protecting the environment. And you said in the past that the science shows that climate action is not optional, which I love as a statement. I think that is very clear messaging. So kudos to you for that. This is one of these
all the comms hot tips. Okay.
It is true. Like, it is actually just a fact that we cannot just wish this away. It is something that is happening, and we need to deal with it, whether that means through mitigation or actually trying to stop it in wherever we can. Hasn't entirely been a huge focus of the current parliament, of course, because there's been a lot of other stuff going on. Even with Bill C5, there was a push to sort of push through some of these review processes. There's different types of them, of course, but environmental is one of them, to try and get shovels in the ground and getting going quickly and all that kind of stuff. I think for a lot of people who voted for the Carney government, they felt pretty safe with the Prime Minister on the environmental side of things, because he has a long history of advocating for these things even before his political life, as do you. But given everything that's going on, climate change has sort of fallen off the front burner of people's minds when it comes to politics in this country right now. And something I got really excited about when this government started to sit was that an Environmental Caucus sprung out of the broader Liberal caucus, and you were part of that, of course. And the goal of that caucus is to try and keep climate change sort of on the forefront and keep it on the governing agenda. Given that all the focus on nation building right now seems to be largely tied up in like the pipeline debate, how do you break through on the environment and actually get that to be a focus of our political agenda in this country?
Good question. Yeah, I kickstarted or restarted the Environment and Climate Caucus for the Liberals with Member of Parliament Eric St. Pierre out of Quebec. We both were in climate and environment before becoming MPs, and wanted to, and you're new, you go to the Hill and you're like, oh, there's a caucus for auto, there's a caucus for rural, there's a caucus for youth and seniors and Sikh and all these things. It's like, where's the Environment and Climate Caucus? And there had been one a few years prior, and I don't know, it fell away and all of the craziness of the times probably. And arguably we might have too many caucus groups because they all need to be supported by the House of Commons. But it's been great to actually have a space to talk about environment and climate as we navigate everything that we are, facing as a country right now in our approaches to how to deal with it. And we talk regularly with the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Natural Resources, et cetera. And what I like and I'm excited about is that we're starting to infuse environment and climate in all of the big decisions and work. So it's not, here's a shiny climate something. It's, we're going to do this massive thing. And yes, we've thought about the environment and climate in the way that we're going to do it. And that is really how we started to see success in Halifax at the local level in trying to drive the implementation of the, you do all this work to get your climate plan approved, you get money, you get people, and then you're like, oh my gosh, how do I actually do this? Like the implementation is really hard because you can't just have one little team of environment and climate professionals that can do this for an entire 4,000 person local government and large city. You need every department to play a role. You need transit to be thinking about it, public works, everyone, emergency management, right? So I really like that is happening. And I like the role of Environment Caucus in keeping that going and making sure it's happening and weighing in on things, different policy decisions. Also, I'm on the Environment Committee, and that's really fun because that's where we actually get to have witnesses and study different policies and different approaches and things like that.
I really like that positioning because there is a tendency in politics that when you create a caucus or, like some kind of smaller group within the group, that it's a way to keep that group talking to each other and getting out of the way. Right? Like sometimes that's how that happens. And we've seen that with like women's groups before, youth groups before in politics. And it's this, there are some political parties who don't even believe in creating those groups because they want them to be part of the whole, yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. But I like that positioning of making environment and climate a part of all the decision making. It makes me think of, the previous government's frame of gender-based budgeting, right? Like it was this approach that women are half of the population. Every decision we make should keep that in mind, right? Like it seems like a pretty obvious thing. And when you think of the scale of climate change and the problem of it, like it should be part of all the decisions we're making because turns out they all tend to impact it anyway, right? So I really do like that focus. And I have to say it calms my little heart over here because I get a bit of anxiety when we're like, oh, whatever about climate change. I'm like, no, but we care about it.
Yeah. I've always been a squeaky wheel and I don't mind getting loud about things. I love making sure people know that Halifax and Atlantic Canada is part of this country and is a meaningful part of the Liberal caucus. And I'm really happy to do that. I think it's an honor to be able to represent a community in this way. But on environment and climate, I will always be making sure that people know that there's a lot of people still thinking about it, if not all, that it is part of the decision making, that we're being very pragmatic because we have to be and we should be. And I have really good relationships with a lot of the environmental community, whether they're nonprofits or the different industries. And we have really good conversations when things come out, like different pieces of legislation, or C5, or this conversation about the Alberta MOU, and those relationships are strong, and I think it's great. And it's not just with me, it's with a lot of caucus and the ministers and staff, etc., to be able to explain, because you can't, tweet out the rationale in a couple of words. And it's great to be able to have those relationships and be able to have those conversations and explain as much as I know and take their questions. And that's one of the great roles of a member of parliament, is to be able to take feedback, take concerns and questions, go find answers. Like, we have a team of people supporting us that can go and dig and find things. And I think it does help to alleviate, because I think the biggest stress for people on environment is just like the uncertainty of different pieces. Like, it's not black and white how this is going to play out. It's a little bit murky because it's still kind of being designed. And so we get worried because we don't know what it means, right? And that's completely fair. And I think we need to just keep working on clarifying, what it is and what it isn't. So.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Like, as a communicator, like, at the end of the day, the message that's coming out of the Prime Minister's, news release website isn't always going to be about that every day, but that doesn't mean that work isn't happening behind the scenes, and that there can't be conversations, happening between members of caucus and stakeholders and things like that. Before we run out of time, I do want to talk about healthcare, because obviously it's not a federal responsibility. Usually, historically, the role of the federal government was to create a system of standards that all the provinces would live up to, and then the provinces would actually go do the work. The feds could provide some of the funding, maybe a little bit of direction with the funding, but at the end of the day, the provinces were responsible for managing that issue. Having said that, again, all politics is local, so most voters don't care about jurisdictional squabbles and who's dealing with it and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, there's challenges in healthcare across the country right now, and it's, there's different push points, and depending on which province or territory you're in, but we are struggling in general. But something I think about as we're, again, talking about International Women's Day, is that for women, the healthcare crisis has kind of always existed, right? Like, we are understudied, we are underdiagnosed, we are undertreated. So this is, not news to us. With it getting bad for everybody, that means it tends to get worse for us, of course. So there is that challenge. But I was really interested to learn about Halifax being home to IWK, because in Ontario, I go to the Women's College Hospital clinic, and they have a whole bunch of stuff that they do there, and it is quite a center for women's health. It's like one of the most important ones in the country. And IWK Health in Halifax serves a similar function for both women and kids, of course. And it is really the only healthcare center in Atlantic Canada with that purpose in mind, in terms of supporting both care and research for women and children. Now, you've been working, I believe, a little birdie told me, you've been working with the foundation there and advocating for a national women's health strategy, which I think is a great idea. And I'm wondering if you can talk about why Canada needs one and what that would actually look like.
I am very happy that I have met Jennifer Gillivan, who runs the IWK Foundation. She is fierce, and she is on a mission to get a women's national health strategy. The first time I met her during the campaign, she gave me a book. It's called Invisible Woman. I haven't finished it because I just get so mad reading it, because it's absolutely ridiculous that we still have the insane bias that we do, gender bias, worldwide, let alone in healthcare, for women versus men. And it's so systemic. It's been for such a long time that I think a lot of people don't even see it until something makes them see it. Women see it a lot, especially in something like healthcare, when they go misdiagnosed for 12 months or longer for something that really should have been well understood and caught in the early days, and they've suffered all this time. Women have heart attacks not knowing they're heart attacks, because the symptoms of a woman present far differently than what we've been taught since we were children on what it feels like to have a heart attack. And it largely stems from all of the research, almost all of the research, always having been done on the 70-kilogram European Caucasian male. And that doesn't serve women. It also doesn't serve any diverse community, of which we are made up of in Canada. So if we were to think about actually investing in the necessary research and data work and policy pieces to advance women's health so that women get the care that they need throughout their lifetimes, I think our entire healthcare system would be vastly improved. And I don't see any reason why, I've been an MP for not a year. I've been approached for needing a national strategy on like 100 different things. So while healthcare is the responsibility of the provinces and territories, I think that the federal government does have a role to play in kind of steering in these important ways, as we do on big things like housing, like climate, without stepping on toes in a perfect world. So I would like to see us kind of really all, being on the same page on where we are with healthcare for women in this country, kind of why we are where we are, and then what it is we should do to fix it, because it's completely unacceptable. And I would love our government to dive in on this. Every ministry has lots of key priorities. If you have too many, you're not going to get anything done. I totally respect, a lot of the work that's happening in the health ministry right now. But, here in Halifax, I was just at a breakfast a couple of weeks ago where they launched the Women's Health Equity Now movement. And there were 300 people. It was sold out at the convention center. We had experts from across this country on women's health and equitable health. And there's a real momentum that's growing. It's a really great time, I think, for people to step in and pay attention to it. And it's really aligning with a lot of work that's happening in Europe. So the IWK Foundation is connected to other foundations across Canada, but also Europe and other places. And they're all kind of working together on this mission. And I think it's really exciting. And it's one of my priorities as an MP for Halifax to really be trying to push for right now.
Well, I'm going to be following that because I find that very interesting. So I'd love to see where that ends up.
I also just want to add one thing on climate change, because, I go a bit crazy when people say, well, it's not a priority for Canadians anymore because I didn't hear it when I was door knocking last time.
Right,
I'm like, okay, well, if you can't buy groceries that are healthy for your children, or you're worried about getting evicted because your rent's too high, or you've been watching the news and you see what's going on across the world, like, it might not be the first thing you tell a politician when they knock on your door. It doesn't mean it's not massively important. It's like an existential crisis, really, for humans. And the things that are getting worse in health, in affordability, in housing, in risk, are in food security, in agriculture, are all linked to climate change, right? Invasive species, Lyme disease, like you name it, it all has tentacles with climate change. And so I'm always like, number one, it's still in the top 10 priorities of Canadians. And number two, even if it's not, we as the public service have a responsibility to pay attention to this. So I just wanted to squeeze that in.
No, definitely. And I'm gonna avoid going on a Lyme disease vaccine rant because I could do a whole episode about that.
Right.
And I know there is an excellent company in Nova Scotia who actually creates an anti-tick spray, which everybody should look into. It's called Atlantic.
Oh, I use it. I use it on my dog.
Protect yourselves. I will say, and I'm going to promo our Earth Day episode that we're going to be doing, but we're doing an episode with one of the folks at Reclimate, and they did a study on exactly what you just said, which is that Canadians actually do still care about climate change. They actually just think other Canadians care less than they do. So it's actually just more of a perspective issue than actually what is true.
Is a wonderful organization. Yeah.
Fantastic organization. So we're just throwing out lots of great people to follow here. So, before we go, I do want to talk about, I'm always looking forward and trying to figure out how we can get more people involved in politics and feel more hopeful about politics, because the alternative is no fun. So, in your cohort, your elected class that you came in with, over half of the MPs are under the age of 50. So I think we're seeing a bit of a demographic shift happening right now, both out in the wild, but also in our politics, where younger people are starting to get involved and run for office. As a young person yourself, and again, we're going to keep claiming that title for both of ourselves, why do you think younger people should get involved in the political process? And what advice do you have for them as they run?
Yeah, I am very happy that we have a very diverse Liberal caucus right now. We have several people that are under the age of 25. We have great diversity amongst cultures, big diversity in age, but also big diversity in life experience, education, and career. I'd say there's more of us that were never politicians before than maybe in past caucus groups. I'd say, from different politics as well, like city councilors or former mayors, business people, NGOs. We have really nice diversity, and I mean, it's the same as in any organization or any bureaucracy. Like, you want to be reflecting your community. You want the workers to be reflective of your community, and we know that a diversity of experience and perspectives makes decisions richer, makes strategy richer, makes innovation happen. So I think it's absolutely important. I'm a mom of 3 kids, 9, 13, and 15. So I'm very much focused on youth and like slightly terrified for them in their future, really hoping that, we're doing all the right things. But, I see youth, like even babysitters and just in my circle, like disengaging. There's all the social media, just using AI all the time, just all these things where I'm like, oh, we just need to kind of get back to a place of grassroots and community and face-to-face conversation. And they need to see themselves in government, in different places they might want to work. They need to see their values and their issues reflected, right? So, and the way to do that is to have a caucus that has them represented handily, right? So 100%. Tatiana Auguste is who now is going to be in a by-election. The MP for Terrebonne is the youngest Black MP in Canada ever. Right? Like, fascinating, amazing. And she's a superstar, and we're going to do everything we can to get her reelected in the by-election. But I think for me, I've always really liked to mentor. And, I've mentored newcomers that want to go in the environment field. I've mentored students that are looking to enter the workforce. I think it's really important for members of parliament and really everyone to have that mentorship focus to really help encourage people to step in whether it's volunteering, whether it's a paid summer job, a student leadership position, whatever it is, if they have an interest to really try and foster that. We just met with a bunch of young Liberals last night who are really engaged in wanting to grow their group here in Halifax and trying to figure out how we can support them. Like, their energy and their passion are refreshing, and we do well to be exposed to that. So yeah, we're always looking for ideas and good ways to support youth and really everyone in the democratic process.
Fantastic. So if you're a young person, start thinking now, because there's always an election around the corner.
Exactly. Call me, we'll chat.
Thanks so much for joining me today. This is a great conversation.
Thank you. I had fun.
You've been listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative, a Canadian-owned company specializing in strategic communications, narrative development, and content creation. Our music today was composed by Elliot Middleton. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to access future episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening.